Imagine a city by the sea, where the sun glints off marble columns and the air smells of salt, incense, and ink. Somewhere in its heart stands a building unlike any the world has ever known. Walls lined with scrolls, each one holding the sum of human thought. Scholars move quietly through dim halls. Scribes copy texts by flickering lamplight, and the lighthouse casts its eternal gaze across the Mediterranean. This was Alexandria, a place where curiosity was sacred, knowledge was power, and ideas could change the world. And yet, despite its brilliance, it is remembered not for what it survived, but for what it lost. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest collection of human knowledge ever assembled, gone, swallowed by fire, war, and time. Tonight, we journey into its shadow, to wander its halls, listen to its whispers, and confront the eternal question: what happens when humanity forgets?
It's night on the coast of ancient Egypt. The year maybe around 250 BCE. The city of Alexandria, jewel of the Mediterranean, hums quietly beneath a dark sky, its air thick with salt and the faint aroma of papyrus and burning oil. Out over the harbor, the great Pharos lighthouse casts its glow, a fire and a mirrored tower so tall that sailors could see it 30 miles out at sea. It's one of the tallest structures ever built, and from the shore, it looks almost divine, a column of light rising above the black waves, guiding ships home like a celestial promise. Somewhere beyond the hum of merchants and the laughter from wine houses, there's another light, smaller, steadier, flickering from a building near the royal quarter. Inside, beneath stone arches and between walls of carved limestone, scribes are at work. Their hands glide across parchment, copying Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian, and Persian texts by lamplight. The faint crackle of oil lamps mixes with the soft scratch of reed pens. And so, in this quiet glow, we find ourselves in one of the most extraordinary human endeavors ever conceived: the Great Library of Alexandria. It wasn't just a library, at least not in the modern sense. It was a dream. The idea that the entirety of human knowledge, every poem, law, observation, philosophy, and myth could be gathered into one place. One vast living memory of humankind. The kind of dream only a civilization at its absolute peak of confidence could imagine.
Alexandria didn't appear out of nowhere. It was founded by none other than Alexander the Great himself, because, of course, who else? After conquering Egypt in 331 BCE, he looked out over the mouth of the Nile and declared that this was where he would build his city. Not just a city of trade or war, but a cosmic city, a bridge between worlds. Greek reason would meet Egyptian mysticism. Persian administration would meet Phoenician trade. It was the perfect crossroads of East and West. Alexander, of course, didn't live long enough to see any of it. He died just a few years later, leaving his empire in chaos, carved up by his generals like hungry wolves dividing a carcass. But one of them, Ptolemy, a clever, bookish general, took Egypt, and with him, Alexandria. Ptolemy wasn't just another warlord, he had a vision. He wanted to transform Egypt into the intellectual center of the Greek-speaking world. Athens was old, tired, a relic of a bygone golden age. But Alexandria was new. It had the energy of empire and the wealth of the Nile behind it. So Ptolemy set about building something that would make Athens' philosophers jealous: a sanctuary of knowledge. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building, it was a system, an institution. Attached to it was the Mauseon, literally the temple of the muses. And yes, that's where the modern word museum comes from. But don't imagine dusty halls filled with glass cases. The Mauseon was more like a university crossed with a monastery. It housed scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers, people who lived, ate, and studied together in a kind of ancient think tank. They were funded by the Ptolemaic kings, given free food, lodging, and most importantly, time to think. It was a golden age of curiosity. Imagine walking its halls at dawn. You'd see mathematicians scribbling geometric proofs in the sand, physicians dissecting animals to understand anatomy, astronomers sketching planetary motions with charcoal on the walls, philosophers arguing endlessly over whether the universe had a beginning or not. And in the midst of it all, the library. A labyrinth of scrolls, columns, and open courtyards where the air itself seemed to hum with ink and dust. Some said it held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Others claimed nearly 1 million. The truth is, no one really knows, because, of course, it's gone.
But let's not skip ahead to the ashes just yet. For now, Alexandria was alive, burning bright. The librarians, under royal orders, were relentless. Ptolemy I and his successors didn't just want books, they wanted everything. Every scrap of wisdom from every culture they could reach. Ships entering the port of Alexandria were searched. Any scrolls found aboard were confiscated, borrowed as the Ptolemies would have called it. The texts would be copied by professional scribes, and the originals were often kept in the library. The copies were returned to their owners, but, well, let's just say not everyone was thrilled with that arrangement. It was intellectual piracy, but for the greater good, of course. They sent agents across the known world to Athens, Babylon, Persia, India, seeking texts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, law, and literature. They wanted the works of Homer, the philosophies of Aristotle, the histories of Herodotus, the mathematics of Euclid, the medicine of Hippocrates, the astronomy of Babylonian priests, even Egyptian ritual texts written in hieroglyphs. If humanity had written it, Alexandria wanted it. And slowly, they were getting it. The dream was intoxicating. Imagine believing that you could hold the sum of all human knowledge under one roof, that if you just gathered enough scrolls, you could unlock the secrets of the universe. It was almost hubristic, but in that beautiful, reckless human way. One of the early librarians, possibly Demetrius of Phaleron, a student of Aristotle, is said to have helped organize the entire collection. He divided works into categories: law, philosophy, medicine, tragedy, comedy, history. The library even had a kind of catalog system, a set of reference scrolls called the Pinakes, written by Callimachus, another scholar-poet. Think about that. The world's first known attempt at a library catalog, centuries before anyone else would even dream of Dewey Decimals. The library became not just a warehouse of knowledge, but a living brain. Scholars there compared languages, translated texts, corrected mistakes, debated theories. It's said that Euclid may have taught geometry there. Eratosthenes, the man who first calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, worked there too. He did it using shadows, sticks, and math. No satellites, no Google Earth, just a sharp mind and sunlight. Another scholar, Herophilus, dissected human bodies, one of the first to do so, and mapped the nervous system. His descriptions of the brain, the pulse, and the heart were centuries ahead of their time. And then there was Archimedes, though based in Syracuse, whose letters and ideas circulated through Alexandria's network. You can almost imagine him laughing in his bath, shouting, "Eureka!" while the librarian hundreds of miles away was quietly copying his treatises by lampshade.
If you stood in that library, among the scrolls, the lamps, the endless murmur of voices, you might have felt it too. That strange, almost holy sense of standing inside the mind of civilization itself. Every roll of papyrus a heartbeat, every shelf a memory. This was humanity, whispering to itself across time. And yet, even in this brilliance, there was fragility. Because knowledge, for all its power, depends on one thing: continuity. Scrolls rot,
ink fades, buildings burn, empires fall, and Alexandria was destined to learn that lesson the hard way. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The murmur of parchment being unrolled, the quiet argument between scholars that's been going on for hours. The Library of Alexandria is alive, breathing through the whispers of those who chase the edges of what can be known. For now, the dream is still intact. The city is still young, rich, and confident. And under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, Alexandria has become something of a beacon, not just of empire, but of intellect. The scholars here are not merely preserving knowledge, they're expanding it, experimenting, questioning, inventing. Take Eratosthenes, for instance. He's one of my favorite figures from this entire saga. A man who could have easily been content just reading the works of others. But that wasn't enough. He wanted to measure the world itself. He noticed something strange in a report from Syene, a city far to the south. Once a year, on the summer solstice, the sun would shine down directly down a well, meaning it was perfectly overhead. But in Alexandria, on the same day and time, the sun cast a shadow. So, Eratosthenes did what no one before him had dared to do. He measured the angle of that shadow, estimated the distance between the two cities, and used geometry to calculate the circumference of the Earth. The result? About 40,000 kilometers. Modern science says 40,075. He was off by less than 1%, using nothing but a stick, a well, and a brain like a laser beam. And where did he do it? In the Library of Alexandria. Surrounded by scrolls, maps, and a world that still believed the sun might orbit the Earth.
Then there's Herophilus of Chalcedon. He's working not with maps, but with bodies. He dissects humans, something unthinkable in most of the ancient world. He studies the brain and concludes, radically, that it's not the heart, but the brain that controls thought. He names the duodenum, the retina, the optic nerve. He even times the pulse with a water clock. Imagine that. While most of humanity was still reading omens and Bergdutz, Herophilus was building the foundations of neuroscience. This is what Alexandria was, a place where questions were sacred. And among the rows of scribes, one might find Callimachus of Cyrene, a poet turned librarian, cataloging hundreds of thousands of scrolls into the Pinaches, an encyclopedic list of every work the library owned, 40 books long. If a king in Pergamon wanted to know whether the library had a copy of Herodotus or a certain lost play by Sophocles, Callimachus could tell him exactly which shelf, in which hall, under which subject it would be found. He was, in essence, the first librarian to say, yes, we have that. But not everyone in Alexandria is reading in peace. Outside the royal quarter, beyond the marbled courtyards of the Museum, the streets are loud and chaotic. Merchants shout in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin. Sailors argue over cargo. Priests from every corner of the empire argue over gods. It's beautiful, but it's also volatile. Because Alexandria isn't just a city of ideas, it's a city of collisions. Greeks rule it. Egyptians inhabit it. Jews flourish within it. And all around, the empire is shifting, stretching thin under the weight of ambition. The library itself is starting to feel that strain. The Ptolemies, once generous patrons of scholarship, are becoming more paranoid. Less philosopher king, more autocrat. Each generation of rulers seems to inherit not their ancestors' wisdom, but their ego. Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, who expanded the library, once ordered every text from Athens' libraries to be borrowed for copying. He paid a massive deposit, received the scrolls, copied them meticulously, and then never returned the originals. Athens was furious, of course, but what could they do? Egypt had gold, ships, and an army. And besides, knowledge was power, and Ptolemy wasn't about to give that power back.
But behind the gilded walls, scholars whispered. Some said the royal family used the library for propaganda, commissioning new interpretations of texts that flattered their rule. Others said scrolls were deliberately edited to suit politics. The pursuit of truth had started to compete with the pursuit of prestige. Because even in the greatest sanctuary of wisdom, humans are still humans. Still, for a while, the light held. Think of Apollonius of Rhodes, who wrote the Argonautica, the story of Jason and the Argonauts, right there in Alexandria. Or Aristarchus of Samos, who had the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the Earth revolved around the sun. A bold idea that would get you killed 1,500 years later. But back then, in Alexandria, it was at least allowed to be discussed. The library had created something that most of history rarely sees, an environment where heresy and curiosity could share the same desk. And yet, even paradise has termites. The first whispers of decline came not from within Egypt, but from Rome. Rome, that lumbering, ambitious, perpetually hungry thing that kept swallowing the world one province at a time. At first, Alexandria watched from afar. Rome was just another power, flexing its muscles across the Mediterranean. But soon, those ripples began to reach Egypt's shores. Trade shifted, politics soured, and the Ptolemies, once wise kings, began turning inward, paranoid and decadent. By the time Cleopatra VII, yes, that Cleopatra, took the throne, the library was already centuries old. The walls still stood, but the world outside them had changed.
Still, imagine walking through it in Cleopatra's day. The corridors lined with scrolls, parchment written in every language known to man, the faint smell of ink and sea air, philosophers debating under the colonnades while cats weave between their feet. The city outside a mix of marble and dust, gold and grain, Rome and Egypt. Cleopatra herself was said to have been fluent in several languages, a scholar in her own right, educated in that same Alexandrian tradition of blending cultures and knowledge. She likely walked the same halls, read the same scrolls. For a brief, glittering moment, it must have felt like the dream of Alexandria could still endure. But beyond the horizon, something darker was coming. A storm that would burn ships, topple dynasties, and set fire to more than just parchment. Because soon, the Library of Alexandria would find itself caught between two of the most dangerous forces in the ancient world: politics and war, and neither has ever been kind to knowledge.
By the middle of the 1st century BCE, Alexandria was no longer the innocent city of scholars and scrolls. It was a chessboard, and the pieces were Roman. Egypt had always been a prize. Its grain fed half the Mediterranean, and its ports were some of the richest in the known world. And so, when Rome began to flex its influence, it wasn't a question of if it would intervene, only when. And when that when finally came, it arrived in the form of a man who never did anything quietly: Julius Caesar. The year was 48 BCE. Rome itself was in civil war. Caesar, having crossed the Rubicon, because apparently he couldn't resist dramatic gestures, was chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for sanctuary. But Egypt was in chaos too. Its rulers, the children of the Ptolemaic line, were locked in their own civil war between the young king Ptolemy XIII and his sister, Cleopatra VII. Yes, that Cleopatra. Brilliant, ambitious, and as politically dangerous as she was intelligent. When Pompey arrived on Egypt's shores, the boy king's advisors saw an opportunity to impress Caesar, so they did what seemed logical to them, which, as history often shows, is not the same as wise. They murdered Pompey on the beach, cut off his head, and presented it as a gift to Caesar. Caesar was horrified. He had wanted to defeat Pompey, not see him butchered like a criminal. But the damage was done. And soon, Caesar found himself drawn into the Egyptian conflict, first as a mediator and then predictably as a participant.
The palace at Alexandria turned into a battlefield of intrigue. Cleopatra, exiled from the city, famously had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters wrapped in a carpet, or, depending on the version, a linen sack. Either way, subtlety was not the plan. The effect worked. Caesar, now charmed by her wit, her politics, and possibly her everything, threw his support behind her claim to the throne. War broke out in the city. Roman soldiers clashed with Egyptian forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII. Streets once lined with scholars were filled with smoke and screaming. And then, somewhere, somehow, during the chaos of Caesar's siege of Alexandria, a spark found its way to the docks. Now, this is where the story blurs, as history so often does. We don't know exactly what happened. Some say Caesar, desperate and outnumbered, ordered the Egyptian fleet in the harbor to be burned, to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Others say it was an accident, the fire spreading from ships to warehouses, and from warehouses to something far worse. Because near those docks, not far from the royal quarter, stood storehouses belonging to the Great Library. They weren't the main halls, not the sacred Mauseon itself, but rather the external depositories. Vast rooms where extra scrolls were stored, ready to be copied or cataloged. And as the flames spread inland, the fire reached them. Papyrus is not known for its fire resistance. Imagine it, the fire crawling up the walls of Alexandria's harbor. The night sky red and black, scrolls curling, disintegrating into ash. Whole libraries of knowledge gone in minutes. Poems of Sappho, treatises of Aristotle, histories of lost empires, maps of lands long vanished, all gone. Scholars later wrote that the fire burned for days, that when it finally died, the harbor was littered with black flakes that had once been the memory of the world. Caesar won the siege, of course. He always did. Cleopatra was restored to the throne, and together, briefly, they became one of history's most mythic pairings. But in the shadows of their victory, the library smoldered. And though not all of it was lost, some sections of the Mauseon may have survived. The damage was immense. Think of it like this. You burn down part of the brain. The body might still live, but it will never think quite the same way again. After the smoke cleared, Alexandria rebuilt. It always did. And for a time, the library seemed to recover. Scholars still came. Scrolls were still copied. The dream limped on, scarred but breathing. But a new age had begun. Rome was now the center of the world, and Egypt was no longer a kingdom. It was a province. The Ptolemies had fallen.
Cleopatra, after her famous suicide, became more myth than memory. And the library, that fragile relic of a lost intellectual empire, now belonged to the Romans. To Rome's credit, they respected Alexandria. They admired its scholars, its architecture, its archives. In fact, later emperors like Claudius and Hadrian even supported the study of philosophy there. But the age of original discovery, that electric curiosity of the early library, was gone. Now, Alexandria was a museum of what once was, a custodian of ghosts. And the ghosts would not rest forever.
Centuries have passed. The year is now the late 3rd century CE, maybe drifting into the 4th. The Roman Empire, that great machine of marble and iron, is creaking under its own weight. Emperors rise and fall so quickly that historians have trouble keeping count. Plagues sweep across the land. The economy collapses, borders crumble. And somewhere amid that slow motion disaster, in a city once called the crown of the Mediterranean, a small miracle still flickers. It is not the great library, that is gone. A ghost whispered about in the streets. No, this is its daughter, the Library of the Serapeum. The Serapeum itself was a magnificent temple complex dedicated to the Greco-Egyptian god Serapis, a strange fusion of Zeus and Osiris, invented by the Ptolemies as a kind of religious compromise between Greek and Egyptian belief. It stood on the hill of Rhodotus, overlooking Alexandria, its columns soaring into the sky. At its heart stood a colossal statue of Serapis, made of precious metals and ivory, a god of both wisdom and resurrection. Within its courtyards, attached to the temple, scholars still gathered. Here, perhaps, the last remnants of the library scrolls were stored. Here, the final generation of Alexandrian thinkers still tried to keep the flame alive. They weren't just reading Homer anymore. They were reading Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, trying desperately to preserve what little had survived centuries of fire and neglect. It wasn't the glory of old Alexandria, but it was something. And sometimes something is all history allows us.
But outside those temple walls, the world was changing. The old gods, the ones whose statues filled Alexandria's squares, were dying, and a new faith was rising. Christianity, once a small and persecuted sect, was spreading rapidly through the empire. And with it came new ideas, new power, and new intolerance for the pagan world that had come before. By the time of Emperor Theodosius I in the late 4th century CE, Christianity had become not just accepted, but official. The old temples were now seen as dens of superstition. Pagan rituals were outlawed. The gods of Egypt, Greece, and Rome were declared false, and their temples, relics of blasphemy. And that included the Serapeum. It began slowly. Whispers of unrest, protests between pagan and Christian factions in Alexandria. This was a city that had always thrived on diversity, but now diversity was dangerous. Philosophers still debated in public, but the mood had turned sharp, angry. In 391 CE, things came to a breaking point. A pagan mob, furious over attacks on their shrines, barricaded themselves inside the Serapeum, the last temple of their gods, the last refuge of the old world. Inside, they may have defended not just their faith, but their history, their scrolls, their memory. Outside, a Christian army gathered, backed by imperial authority. After a tense standoff, Emperor Theodosius ordered the temple to be destroyed, and the Christians entered. What followed was not a fire this time, but a demolition. Columns toppled, statues were smashed. The great image of Serapis was dragged down and shattered, its face broken,
its eyes gouged out. Whatever scrolls remained in its library, the last physical descendants of the great Library of Alexandria, were lightly scattered, looted, or burned. And with that, the final light of Alexandria, the one that had flickered stubbornly for 700 years, went dark. Imagine that silence. The echoes of footsteps in a ruined temple. The wind lifting scraps of parchment across the stone floor. The words of philosophers and poets carried away like dust. It wasn't just books that died there. It was a worldview, one that believed the universe could be understood through reason, not revelation. That knowledge could be gathered, studied, and shared without fear. That, in the end, was the true loss of Alexandria. Not the paper, but the principle. Still, not everything vanished into the void. Some of the knowledge that once filled those halls survived, carried in fragments to other lands. Greek texts were copied and hidden in monasteries. Others were translated into Syriac and Arabic centuries later, during the Islamic Golden Age, when scholars in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo rediscovered the lost works of Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Euclid. It was as if the ghost of Alexandria whispered across centuries, "Find me again." And they did, piece by piece, idea by idea.
But here's the thing. We love to imagine a single apocalyptic event, a night when the library burned and the world grew dark. But the truth is far sadder and far more human. Alexandria didn't die in one night. It faded slowly, painfully, over generations. Burned, rebuilt, neglected, attacked, forgotten. Until one day, no one even remembered exactly where the library had stood. That's how knowledge usually disappears, not with an explosion, but with a sigh. And yet, even as the ruins settled into dust, people kept telling its story. Because the Library of Alexandria became more than a building. It became a myth, the eternal symbol of human curiosity and the fragility of civilization's memory. It's the story every scholar fears and every dreamer secretly understands. That no matter how much we learn, we are always one fire away from forgetting everything. So now the temple is gone. The scrolls are ash. The voices have fallen silent. But the dream, that impossible, reckless dream of Alexandria, still glows faintly somewhere inside us. Because every library, every school, every university that followed, every student who stays up too late reading something just to know is, in some small way, an echo of that lost city by the sea.
The shore is still there, you know. The Mediterranean still laps against the same stones where once the ships of Ptolemy docked, heavy with scrolls from Athens, Tyre, and Babylon. Somewhere, under the modern city, beneath asphalt and concrete, the bones of the old library still sleep. Fragments of limestone walls, half-burned papyrus, a dream buried in sand. And yet, if you listen, really listen, you can almost hear it. The faint murmur of voices in a dozen languages, the scratching of reed pens, the sound of a civilization trying to understand itself. Because the Library of Alexandria never truly vanished. It simply moved, not in space, but in spirit. The library was more than shelves of scrolls. It was a statement of faith. Not faith in gods or kings, but in human curiosity itself. It said, the universe can be known. That is an extraordinary claim, and one that we, in the 21st century, still wrestle with every day. When we scroll through digital archives, read academic papers, or ask a machine a question, we are still trying to build what Alexandria once tried to be. A single place where all knowledge can live. The difference is, our libraries are no longer made of stone. They're made of light.
But before we pat ourselves on the back for that, it's worth remembering something. The same forces that doomed the library are still very much alive. Ignorance, politics, fanaticism, neglect. The ancient fires were literal, ours are slower, algorithmic, ideological, quiet. Information can still burn, even without flame. Truth can still be rewritten. Knowledge can still fade, one deleted file, one forgotten link, one censored voice at a time. It's not fire that threatens us now, it's forgetting. Still, the story of Alexandria is not just a tragedy, it's also a kind of resurrection story. Because knowledge, like a phoenix, doesn't die, it just changes form. After Alexandria's fall, its texts scattered across centuries and continents. Greek manuscripts ended up in Constantinople. From there, many traveled east, to Persia, then to the great libraries of the Islamic Golden Age. In Baghdad, scholars at the House of Wisdom translated the surviving works of Aristotle, Galen, Euclid, and Ptolemy, often improving on them. They preserved what Alexandria had lost, and in doing so built the bridge that would later carry those ideas back into Europe. When the Renaissance dawned, it was as if the library had quietly returned, reborn through Arabic manuscripts, through scholars like Al-Kindi, Avicenna, and Averroes, who had kept the flame alive. So yes, Alexandria burned, but its ashes seeded the world.
In that sense, we are all living in the shadow, or perhaps the reflection, of the Library of Alexandria. Every archive, every search engine, every classroom is part of that lineage, and maybe that's what makes the legend so enduring. It's not just nostalgia for lost books. It's mourning for what we could be, and in fleeting moments, almost were. Think about what that library represented. A civilization so confident in its intellect that it believed every truth, every story, every idea was worth preserving. It didn't matter where a text came from, Greece, Egypt, Babylon, India, it belonged to everyone. That's the part we forget. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just about knowledge, it was about inclusivity, a place where wisdom was not bound by language, religion, or race. In a world still divided by those same things, that idea remains radical. And maybe that's why its ghost still haunts us, because we sense that we're supposed to be its heirs, the caretakers of memory. But deep down, we know how fragile we are. A single fire, a single flood, a single moment of indifference, and centuries of thought can vanish. It's a humbling truth, and somehow a comforting one, because it means that preserving knowledge, writing, reading, learning, is not just a luxury, it's an act of resistance.
So, imagine it again. The night air of ancient Alexandria. The lighthouse burning over the dark water. A scholar walking home through marble streets, carrying a lamp and a bundle of papyrus. The wind from the sea flickering through his flame. He knows the fire could go out at any moment. And still, he walks carefully, shielding it with his hand. That's us, every generation, carrying the light forward. The Library of Alexandria may have fallen, but the dream that built it is still alive. Every act of curiosity, every question whispered into the dark, every attempt to understand instead of ignore is another spark of that same ancient fire. And as long as we keep that flame alive in books, in words, in the quiet wonder of the human mind, then Alexandria never truly died. The library still stands, not in stone, but in us.